helping out from a health quality standpoint. And that's kind of the ultimate reason why I went into clinical research and development, because I really feel like you marry the two of a residency, as well as that global impact or that real world impact experience, kind of together within that clinical research space. And maybe biased, but I truly do think that you use your pharmacy knowledge to the fullest of its extent within the industry if you're doing a fellowship within clinical research and development.
All right, thank you so much, Sean. So next we have, oh gosh, next we have Joseph for you.
All right, well, so hi guys. My name is Joseph Weidman. You call me Joe, though. I'm not that formal. I'm not a big Joseph guy. But so to say the background, I guess. So I came from the University of Pittsburgh, and so at the University of Pittsburgh, I came into that with a lot of basic scientific knowledge, and I really wanted to keep that acumen up, and so I did a lot of bench research there. And that sort of led me into pharmacy because it was sort of just applied very basic science to drugs and helping patients. And so I always ended up saying that my mission was to help people. And then I said, well, I guess you're good at science. So to help people through science was what I was initially setting out to do. And so I gravitated towards more and more the lab, as well as sort of just investigations and scientific inquiry in general. And so I ended up working in a few very interesting lead compound labs, doing a lot of medicinal chemistry, as well as, doing obviously the pharmacy school track. So going on the hospital rotations and seeing patients firsthand. And so I think Sean put it really well when it's a marriage of the two, right? It's a marriage of, a residency, but also, being able to get a clinical experience. And my role in particular actually also allows the bench work to continue as well. So it was a perfect fit, quite honestly. And so what clinical development really means to me at the end of the day, I think a lot of people, if you've heard any of my elevator speech at all, anyone will ever always tell you my saying is, I don't want to make you take Tylenol better. I want to make you a better Tylenol. And so I do really echo what all the other pharmacists I think on the call will say, that pharmacists do have a unique perspective and a unique way to use their knowledge in the industry and bring better care to patients and find the silver bullet, right? The on target, no off target therapies that our patients so desperately need. So.
All right, thank you so much, Joseph. On to the next speaker, Anastasia.
Hello, I'm Anastasia, and I'm currently a clinical scientist at Genentech. I work in the neuroscience space. I was a Rutgers fellow, but before that, I went to Midwestern University in Chicago for pharmacy school. And I did an internship at Takeda in pharmacometrics. So I did a modeling and simulation of all of these fascinating PK models, looking at what dose is effective for patients, what dose is safe for patients. And that internship got me really involved and really thinking about a career in industry, and specifically on the R&D side of things in clinical development. So I applied to fellowships as a P4, and I did a Rutgers Genentech fellowship in late stage clinical science. So we focus on clinical trials that are phase 3 or registrational trials that get submitted to FDA. I did 1 year in ophthalmology and 1 year in neuroscience, and I stayed there ever since as a full-time employee. What I really love about clinical development is that I see it as the heart of the industry. You kind of have a little view of all the other functional areas like regulatory, medical affairs, statistics, operations. You work with all of these different functions, but you sort of, as a gatekeeper of the protocol, you kind of get to be in charge of what's happening in the trial scientifically and spread your scientific knowledge to everyone. And I think as pharmacists, we are trained to communicate really, really complex scientific material to people that might not have all of the knowledge that we have. And that's what I really enjoy about the clinical development job.
Thank you so much. So next I'll actually be going through a couple questions for our pharmacists, and I'll actually have my e-board members, Val and Victoria, kind of go back and forth on these with you.
So, hi everyone, I'm Val, and just a heads up, I did put it in the chat. If you guys have any questions that you want to ask, you can go ahead, put it in the chat, or at the end, we'll leave it open for questions if you do want to ask on video. So for the pharmacists, what does your day-to-day look like? I know we heard a general overview of clinical development, but what would you say on, I'm sure it changes every day, but on a daily basis, what do you guys do? And anyone can answer this, any of the pharmacists.
I guess I can take that one first, because I think maybe there is a component to my day even today that I don't know if my colleagues and pharmacists, maybe they do share with me, but I actually also was able to be able to go into the lab. So what my day-to-day normally looks like is, so there's a lot of, obviously with COVID, there's a lot of different, working environments that we've all been put in. So a lot of my days are in lab and some of my days are not in lab, and some of them are hybrids of the two. So you can only show up in lab and do your work for as long as the work allows, and then you come home. But today I had a few experiments I needed to run. I work with monoclonal antibodies, and so I work with understanding how they, the dosing and administration of them to a patient with IV sets and subcutaneous as well goes. And so that was what I had done. I did that from I'd say 8 a.m. to around 3, and then I came home. And I had a few meetings on a clinical trial I will be writing some guidelines on for prostate cancer. So yeah, it's a kind of a mishmash of the two for me. But yeah.
So I always say it really depends on at what point your study is on. So if you're in study startup mode, you might be writing a protocol. You might be working on a clinical development plan, and that entails meeting with stats to learn about the statistical plan. You might be meeting with clinical operations to decide operationally, is it feasible to have visits every 2 weeks, something like that. So you're kind of meeting with all of these different people to try to figure out and plan the trial. If you're in study maintenance, I've done medical data review, which is where you look at all the data coming in from the trials. And so for example, they'll report an AE of pneumonia, and you'll have to make sure that antibiotics are reported as well. And, have they been on antibiotics for 6 months? There should be an end date somewhere. So as pharmacists, you use your clinical knowledge that way. And at the end of the study closeout, you continue looking at the data, cleaning the data, while also analyzing the data with statistics colleagues. So every day will be really different, and it will change a year from now or 2 years from now, depending on how the study progresses. And that's what I like about it.
I 100% agree with what Anastasia said. The one thing I want to add that's a little bit different and something that I didn't really know much about until I started was vendor management, because a lot of the work that you do is going to actually be external to the company, because a lot of the companies will hire CROs, contract research organizations, that help you run your clinical trials. So there's a different project manager on their side that there is on your side, and you have to make sure that everybody's aligned. Additionally, at least for randomized blinded studies, you're going to have DMC committees or steering committees that work with unblinded data that you can't see. So you have to have a vendor that manages that, because you're not allowed to manage that since you're blinded. So there's a lot of logistics that goes into that, the KOL recruitment to sit on those committees, the contracting process, things like that. So I'm in study startup mode right now, as you can tell by what I'm doing. But basically, so right now we're trying to iron out all those details in order to start the study. And then we already have our medical monitoring meeting set up, as Anastasia mentioned, to kind of look into the details of the study once the patient data starts coming in. So it's a lot of logistical accounting for what has to happen. Creating CRFs is a huge thing too, case report forms, because data management is going to manage your data when it comes in, but you have to tell them what data you need. You have to go through those, and a lot of it is also testing things. So I actually have, even right here right now, a patient iPad and a patient iPhone, because we're doing startup. So I have my UAT testing devices, and I see you guys laughing because you know exactly what I'm doing. But you have to test all the devices. You have to make sure that all the systems run for the patients and for the physicians. So a lot of the things aren't as glamorous as we make them seem, probably, but it goes into the job, and it's very important for the end outcome.
Thank you everyone for sharing. Sean, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I guess just real quick. I mean, as the audience here, you can see that there is no such thing as a day-to-day in clinical development, which is the beauty of it. And that's something that we really appreciate. And so just to really quick agree with what everyone said, just kind of going into more in that study maintenance piece that Anastasia was bringing up. So there's also other things. So for example, my day today was a site initiation visit. So we actually, as a clinical scientist, would again go to the sites pre-COVID. Now we're doing them virtual, but actually teach the investigator, the physicians that actually treating the patient with your product, as well as the trial lead nurses and the study coordinators, and as well as your CRO colleagues that are there on those calls to help you out. Something that Irina was talking about, of your protocol and the ins and outs of your protocol, the efficacy and safety, the things that really do make an impact of what you're assessing at the end of the day for your trial. And then even on top of that too, I think something that most of us harped on was those relationships. Again, relationships with your CRO, relationships with your statistician. And again, going back to those relationships with your team on the ground, meaning the physicians, the nurses, the study coordinator. So you'll get calls, depending on where your study is, of calls from the study coordinator, from the physician saying, hey, protocol says X, Y, and Z. Well, can I do W, X, Y? Or, hey, the protocol says this, what about this? Or, hey, what can we do? What can't we do? And so being that expert on the protocol as well, I think is a huge piece for clinical development. But again, going back to that piece where people think like, oh, well, you go into pharma, you never build those relationships with the teams and things like that. But it's definitely not true, especially within the hospital setting. So just wanted to quickly add that, Val. Thank you.
I mean, everything sounds very interesting, but I think the common theme is there's no day-to-day consistency in that. And I love your guys' energy. I just wanted to add that all of you are like agreeing with everything you're saying and very energetic. Thank you for that. So what made you choose this functional area and the specific company that you guys are at? I know you guys mentioned why you went into clinical, but maybe you can talk a little bit more as to why that specific company really drew your interest.
I don't know if we should just keep going in order as we did before. So Joe, if you want to start, and we'll just go back around.
Yeah, sure, we can go into it. Yeah, so the reason I went into the clinical the functional area. So why I went into clinical development, sort of what I said earlier. But I do see that there's a lot of different roles a pharmacist can take on, right? You can get out of school and go straight to a CVS if you would like. And I saw that as a little prescriptive. I like open-ended problems. I like interesting things that don't have solutions. Maybe the problems aren't even defined well. Stuff like that, right? So creating something out of nothing, essentially. And so I think that's what clinical design and development does, and drug development does, right? I mean, you take a problem, a patient with a disease, and you slowly, over a long time, a long, very hard, painstaking road, build them a solution. And I think that is really interesting. Not to take away from any of the other, functions of pharmacy. I just found that one to be really, really interesting. Just to be one of those, people who can say that they worked on this drug from an early point, or, everyone grows up and says to themselves, I want to cure cancer or whatever. And now you get to work on a cancer trial. Well, like that's super amazing, right? Like I could have never thought I would have that chance to be such a helpful person to the society. So, if I even touch a little bit of it and change a little bit of it, or help at least one person, I'm pretty happy about it. As to why the specific company, I saw there was a portfolio that was pretty rich at J&J. And I was pretty happy to be joining the department. So I'm, like I said earlier, both in clinical, but also in drug development. And so I see both sides. I see before it gets to the clinic. I see as I had calls today on choosing, choosing the first in human dose for one of our drugs, and have a say in that. So it's very interesting, and I think that J&J had those ideas to bring cross-functional talk and to bridge those two sort of areas where we have the very brainiac PhD, knows the pKa to every single amino acid attached to the thing, and then the clinical side where we understand that you can't it just doesn't go into an IV, and you don't just dose them, and it doesn't and we understand a lot of the different things that go into running a clinical trial and the clinic in general. And so bridging that gap, I think, was something that J&J was looking to do and Janssen was looking to do, and so I was there.
Thank you. And guys, don't feel the need to you don't have to answer all the questions. If you don't feel too passionate about any topic, you don't have to answer it. We just kind of left it open-ended so that you guys can really tell us about your journey and your experiences. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what Val's really trying to say is that if we all answer the question, we'll be here till like 10 o'clock. So we'll try to keep it brief. I'm just messing, but I guess I'll jump in real quick because this is something that does resonate with me. And sorry, my family still has a landline, so that phone just rang. But I guess going to the functional area, I think we already discussed. I think Joe hit it pretty well. I would go into choosing the specific company, and I might be opening up a can of worms here, but that's completely fine. I just want to see where the audience wants to gauge the conversation. But when I look at choosing the specific company, I go back to choosing a fellowship or applying to fellowships. And what I usually give advice to students is to cast your net as wide as possible. Again, that's also another conversation of how many fellowships you apply for, if it's too many or too little, just coming to what you're comfortable for. But again, casting the net as wide as possible. But then making that internal ranking in your head of, again, from Joe's example of talking about the pipeline of J&J, which is, it's all right, it's not that great, but that's a complete joke. J&J's pipeline is incredible. But looking at pipeline, looking at therapeutic area, and then looking at this company culture and what you're assessing, and especially fellowships. I think fellowships are different within clinical development from one company to another. And so making that internal ranking in your head, but I think ultimately for me at the end of the day, and you'll see a lot of fellows, or not a lot of fellows, a lot of candidates choose this way, is just that relationship and that rapport you have with the team. I think that definitely made a factor for me when I was ranking certain companies. Just to give just candid example of with my top three, it was really Merck, Genentech, and then Celgene at the time. Was again in that order, 1, 2, 3, and then during the interview process, Celgene came up just from that relationship that I built with the fellows, the team, and the value that you can have as a pharmacist, as a fellow there. So that's something that helped me pick the specific company.
So I'll actually jump in because I think my story is a little bit different, because I actually was applying for regulatory fellowships when I went to mid-year, and I got 3 on-sites, didn't secure a position from mid-year, and actually got my fellowship as a post-mid-year fellowship. And because it was cross-functional, had the opportunity to actually experiment with different functional areas and try different things, and realized by doing it that I was drawn to clinical development, and I was drawn to what that role entailed. And also by basically rotating different companies, I learned kind of the environment that I thrived in and what I wanted. So I knew that I wanted either oncology or rare disease because honestly, and I'm not trying to put anybody down or anything, I feel like those functional areas are the most related to their patients. Like they work directly with their patients. There's more advocacy work that goes into it and more patient relationships. And at the same time, it's also the highest unmet need. And not saying that others aren't needed, like obviously we need Alzheimer's treatment, we need Parkinson's, things like that, but overall I feel like as a function, as a therapeutic area, as a general statement, those can be covered in that. But with the same kind of thought process, everybody here I think is at bigger companies, and I was the one that, like, I chose the smaller mid-size. We actually just hit 500 employees worldwide like last month, so we're small relatively compared to everybody else. And I think that drives us internally. Like we had that opportunity to wear multiple hats, and anybody who knew me in college knows that I like to do a bit of everything, and I'm still that way. So I'm always up for a challenge, and I'm always trying to get involved in everything that I can. And I think that small company culture really fosters that. So I have the ability to kind of intervene in different things. Like even during my fellowship for Amicus, one time we had a busy group in statistics, and literally just raised my hand in a meeting, and I was like, hey, I have a statistics minor. Is it okay if I interpret the data for you guys, and then you can just edit it instead of writing it from scratch since you're so busy, and got a publication out of it that way. So things happen easier, I think, in a smaller company because there's less logistics around it. It's kind of more flowy and less sectioned off. And that's kind of what I was looking for, and to each their own.
So thank you for that. And it seems like the main takeaway is really who you interact with and how you really see yourself adding to the company, right? So I know Sean has talked a little bit about the fellowship aspect, and I think their next set of questions will really dive deep into fellowship. So I'm going to skip the next question if that's okay. Because we will be discussing fellowships in our next slide. So I did hear you guys mention a few other functional areas that you guys do interact with, but what other areas, I guess, in the main categories, as I don't want to really contain it, but such as regulatory or like marketing or med affairs, do you really see yourself interacting on a day-to-day basis? Pharmacist wise, so like people who are in that pharmacy group. That's kind of the question.
I guess I'll quickly jump in. I know Anastasia has a lot to offer too with being with the CRO, but the short answer is yes, 100% yes. And what we usually tell candidates now that we're going through the mid-year process is to be a good clinical scientist, you have to understand all those functional areas. Because I forget if it was Irina or Anastasia, I believe it was Anastasia, just saying that really like clinical development is that hub. The cheesy analogy, but it's always stuck with me and I always share it, so pardon me. But if you look at the pharmaceutical industry of the car, they really look at clinical development as that engine of that car, really steering, really getting the motions going and really bringing that science to those people that need it. So with that though, with functional area, again, everyone wants a piece hand in the data. So your regulatory colleagues, I think we talked about it before. So a real quick example of that I'm working on with Study Startup of submitting your ICFs or submitting your protocol to health authorities. And again, that's an example of the FDA, but in other countries. And we are doing that right now with one study, and each country has their selective FDA. And you think it's easy peasy where you just submit your protocol, everything's good to go, and you can just start enrolling patients, but it's not that easy. I see Irina laughing over there. But it's true. They really push you to say, hey, X, Y, and Z should be in your protocol, or hey, this should be taken out. What is going on with this? And every country has something different too. So that's a huge time where you work with their regulatory colleagues to see, okay, well, we've done this in the past when we looked at certain protocols, or hey, this is how we responded to this question before. What do you think? And they rely on clinical, and we also rely on regulatory for their insights and their input. And so we need to think from a regulatory standpoint what we can do to help them. And so that's just one example. I know my other panelists can share other examples with marketing, with medical affairs, with, again, CROs, as well as our just even like medical communications colleagues and like MSLs out in the field. But I just want to give that one example right there.
Yeah, I think Sean said it really well. We interact with a lot of different people, and like Irina said, even vendors. So for example, one of the vendors on my trial is ERT, and they have a tablet that I have also tested. That's why I was laughing, Irina. But by the way, this month they got hacked. It's all over the news. You can see, you know, ransomware, ERT hacked. I guess they were part of the they were supplying. They were a vendor for IQVIA as well for one of the COVID vaccine trials. Hence why they got hacked. But it doesn't just affect those studies. It affected our studies who are undergoing user acceptance testing, and all of the active studies as well. So it's dealing externally with people that you want to preserve relationships with, but you're in really tough situations and you don't want to do anything to damage the relationship. But at the end of the day, you need to meet those deadlines, because every day that you are not, if you're in study startup, every day that you're not recruiting patients, it's kind of a patient's loss, right? So it's a lot of balancing, and it's a lot of soft skills. And that's why when you interview for fellowships, if you're interested in that, you will get asked a lot of questions about teamwork, directly and indirectly. And you need to be able to answer, yes, I play well with others, in a nice story that you know, faced in your past. But essentially, you need to be able to manage relationships really well, because we interact with so many people.
Thank you. That's very informative, and that's kind of the answer that I expected from everyone, that you interact with a lot, especially since you guys are the startup, the beginning of everything, basically. So everyone wants a piece of clinical development. So I'm gonna skip to I guess I'm not skipping at all, but this is a question that I really want to know. How much of your pharmacy knowledge from school are you using in your day-to-day, or just in general? Like, I know that I'm in classes right now learning about all of these disease states and all these little things about them and how to diagnose them and things like that. How much of that are you actually using, and how much did you learn on the job?
So I can jump in. I use like all of it, and then there's even some of it I needed to learn even more. So like, you don't walk into a room with like a Yale double PhD and not know all 20 amino acids like the back of your hand, stuff like that. So like you know, obviously I had a background that was very down and dirty, science-y type stuff. But it's a lot, right? I mean, you know, I would say, you know, very crazy tangential stuff that you didn't even think was going to matter to you, or you weren't going to remember or something. You'll remember that, and you'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, and I remember that was in that trial, or I read that paper, you know, and did that for a journal club, and that, you know, that is essentially what I'm working with today, or something like that, or a reaction, right, or something like that you didn't think. I mean, 100% I knew that OChem was going to apply to my future, but most people don't think that OChem is going to apply to their future. But it very much heavily influences mine and my everyday. So I don't know if OChem specifically made it into my other pharmacists' lives here, and maybe they're happy for that. But anyway, yeah, I'd say that, you know, while it may not seem relevant, I would say that there's specialization, right? So, you know, do I use every single part of cardio every day when I'm in prostate cancer? Not as much, and you know, endocrine's more what I'm working with primarily. But you know, everything plays a role, right? I mean, if you're talking about cytokine release syndrome, right, you got to know that blood pressure drops, you know, and that's one of the problems that with CRS. So it can go on and on, right? So you know, the body is the body. At the end of the day, you got to know all about it, and so, you know, you definitely apply a lot of what you learn.
I'm going to quickly jump in on this. I think that for me, the main thing pharmacy school teaches you is how to learn, and it teaches you to be inquisitive, and those drug information skills that I know you all hate your drug info class, those are key, because it's okay to not know the answer, but you need to know where to find it. And I know USciences kind of drills that into you, that it's okay to say, I don't know, I'll get back to you later. But that's true in pharmacy and retail pharmacy, but it's also true in industry, because nobody expects you to know the answer from the top of your head, but everybody expects you to know where to find it and be able to get back and be able to follow up on it. And that's kind of key when you're moving forward. For me, also statistics, and I actually did a statistics minor because I knew I was going to go into industry and I wanted to be able to analyze my data better. So your biostats course, I know USciences at least used to offer really good electives like statistics of clinical trials and things like that. So classes like that really formulate what I do every day, because as Anastasia mentioned, like statistical analysis plans, we have to review them. We have to understand them. You have to know where the math is coming from, and you have to be able to understand your trial and how to evaluate it.
I totally agree. The stats are so important. Like, I didn't touch on that, but it's very important to know at least, you know, the basics of stats. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not really what I wanted to hear, but I mean, it's the truth. And I mean, it makes sense. I mean, that's what we're in school for. But I think even like with the very little experience I have in industry, I feel like that's the main consensus, which is you got to know where to find that information. And obviously reading clinical trials requires you to know statistics. So I'm going to skip the COVID section because I feel like a lot of you have already discussed how a lot of things are online now, and how you still do get to come into labs, but you have to be fully like isolated basically. But where do you guys see yourself in 5 to 10 years? So I guess this isn't a very typical question to ask, but I know everyone moves around and everyone tries to progress in their career. How do you guys see yourself progressing in 5 to 10 years?
Not with an N95 and sore ears. That's I'll say that, and then I'll let everyone else chime in. But yeah, that speaks to number 6, I guess.
Joe, you got to follow up after that. That was a good one.
I guess I'll jump right in. Yeah. No, I mean, N95s are just super stretchy and they hurt my ears a lot. But no, where do I see myself in 5 to 10? So obviously a clinical scientist role definitely would be interesting to me. You know, anything that's involved with the study responsible XYZ. So anything that's, you know, reporting to or working with, you know, a study responsible physician, as Sean mentioned, site visits, that kind of thing. You know, all of that, you know, startup work. I think I do want to stay with more early development and not late. I do think it's just there's some kind of magic about, you know, taking a look at mini pig data and taking a look at mouse data and taking a look at all these different assays and you know, all the brainiacs that put all their might into it, and you still just don't know what's going to happen when you put it first in human. And I think it's really, really exciting. It's sometimes dangerous, and it's a mixed bag, but I think that it's you know, it's a part of medicine that is quite interesting, and so, you know, that's I want to stay close to that for sure.
Anastasia, you go first. I see you moving your mouse. Go ahead.
And I lost it between my 2 screens. Found it. I just wanted to mention that the reason why I like industry so much is there's so many other opportunities for pharmacists. Things that you haven't even thought of, like business development or portfolio management, all of these abstract words that don't mean anything to you right now. But once you start working, once you get into industry, you might work with some of these people and you might think, hey, that's really cool. I want to learn more about it. And I think hopefully my colleagues will agree that in most of our companies, we are encouraged to look outside, especially if you're in a fellowship. Maybe you could do a rotation, you know, 20% of your time, 30% of your time, something like that could be done, where it's pretty easy to move throughout departments. So you don't have to stay in clinical development forever. even though it's something that I really love, and I do hope to stay for the next 5 to 10 years, because there's so much to learn. You will always be humbled every day. When I was a fellow, every day I learned something, and then the next day, I'd feel on top of the world, and then the next day, someone would ask me a question, and it's just directly out of the protocol, and I'm just like, I don't know, I'm gonna have to look it up. So a position that humbles you, that I really like that, but you don't have to stay in any position, so you're not stuck.
Oh, I was on mute the entire time, sorry. So I agree with both of my colleagues, both is in regards to staying within clinical development and finding that reason for you. So for Joe, for example, wants to stay with that early side and seeing those mouse models and seeing where the magic really does happen in that early stage, where versus me, I kind of want to stay in that later stage and really see that impact of the patients at the end of the day. That just ties into the residency that I kind of wanted to do before fellowship. And so with that, what Anastasia was saying too, of just staying within those 5 to 10 years, you really are humbled at some points, and you do feel like on the top of the world. But at the same time, I've seen people go outside of clinical. So a great example is my second year. Actually left after his fellowship, went to MSL. And I've seen that jump vice versa between medical and clinical, and vice versa. And that's the great thing about clinical, not being biased here, but I really do think if you understand clinical trials, you can really go into any department after that. Medical, marketing, BD and E that Anastasia was talking about. But for me, first and foremost, want to get a job. So I've got to finish the fellowship. So anything they can give me, I hope I get. But most importantly, I hope in the next 5 to 10 years is continue with that late stage and really look at that strategy piece of seeing, and that's what's great, that pharmacists are transcending the clinical space right now. There's actually a pharmacist that did the Rutgers Fellowship who is now actually managing physicians, which no one would ever think. Everyone thinks there's a ceiling in clinical development, that once you reach a ceiling, you have to be a physician, but it's not true. And he's actually overlooking an entire portfolio of drugs and trials and assessing the strategy of where to go with those assets in earlier stage lines, or maybe new protocols or new studies to help out within that space. And that's something that I want to get into. And again, using that clinical knowledge and that pharmacy knowledge, I think gives you that extra edge within the clinical space.
Thank you for sharing. Irina, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to jump in quickly. I think for me, I also like the late phase, and I like the patient end goal and seeing the patient impact. But with that, I did want to say that one of my dream jobs eventually down the line, like I want to stay in clinical development for at least like 5 to 8 years, but then on that 8 to 10 mark, I think that I've seen how this person works, and it's a medicines lead. So basically kind of being the go-to person to all the functions for that one specific drug. So you become kind of overseeing a specific product within the company, and you work directly with all the other functions. So you help out clinical development, you help out regulatory, you kind of become the end all be all of knowing that product inside out. And I think that's definitely something that's very humbling and something that's very interesting to me, because as I mentioned earlier, I like to do everything. So I think that that's kind of an ultimate end goal. But for now, definitely clinical development, because like Sean mentioned, once you know clinical development, it's way easier to kind of know everything else, because you have to understand how the trial functions and how they work together. So I think definitely learning clinical development inside out before that.
I'm so glad we got like a group of pharmacists that all want to do different aspects, or for the most part, different aspects of the clinical development portion. So you guys answered all of these questions with like more detail than I would have ever expected, and not in a bad way. I'm sorry if that came off. No, I would stay in this meeting forever. Honestly, you guys are so informative, and I'm glad that we got a group of pharmacists that are like younger, so they're not like way into their careers, like already, don't want to talk to us at all because we seem like such small people, but you guys are really informative. It's great. So now I'm going to pass it off to Victoria, because I know a lot of people are here to listen to the fellowship questions. So Victoria, take it away.
Thanks, Val. So I'm Victoria. I am part of the IPhO board. And I'm actually not going to start with these questions. I'm going to start with the questions that came in the chat because I just want to make sure we get to those. So we actually have one question here that asks, do you have any research experience during pharmacy school that might help you get into fellowship, especially knowing the clinical trial process?
Yeah, so I'll quickly start because I think I'm the anomaly here. I don't know about Anastasia, but I know Irina and Joe have extensive internship experience with the industry. And so I am the exact opposite, where I did not have any internships whatsoever. I was a part of DIA on campus, and that was the extent that I had. And then on top of that, I did an industry rotation in pharmacovigilance. So nothing in terms at all from clinical trial development to clinical design to benchtop research. It really came down to, and I think you can see from the other three panels that I have here of those nonverbal skills and those cues and working with individuals and sharing that leadership experience and finding, again, at least for my company, something that I think I was able to really harp on was just that overall person at the end of the day. We all know that you're pharmacists and we all know you're capable of doing the job, but it just comes down to if we're able to work with you and you're adaptable and open to doing things. So that's my experience. But again, I know Joe has extensive experience and so does Irina.
Yeah, so I'll just hop in since thanks Sean for the sort of the intro there. But no, Sean is totally right. It's all about the whole person, I think, at the end of the day. And I think a lot of my answers to these fellowship questions are going to hinge on that. But as it relates to research, obviously, so I was in one of my research positions was, for example, synthesizing lead compounds for when after therapeutic hypothermia is no longer an option for stroke victims and they warm back up, and then brain damage starts occurring even after that. And so we were tasked with creating inhibitors of a CYP enzyme that creates a certain type of prostaglandin that was linked to a lot of post-stroke brain damage. So I ended up synthesizing 4 leads in that lab. And so that's a very, very I was obviously kind of good at chemistry, but that isn't just the way you can get research experience. Obviously, it's going to be a little translational because I don't think your university or any of the PIs there, maybe they are, but you might not be able to get exactly involved with a human clinical trial when you're in school. But I think obviously being able to go for things that show that you're able to perform the steps of scientific inquiry, right? So you have a hypothesis and you think something might be, and you decide to yourself how to test that. And maybe, the PI has already decided that or something like that. But, finding someone who's in there, innovating in that way and helping them in their, in their scientific inquiry, essentially, and finding an answer to a question is going to speak volumes when if you get asked any of these questions in interviews or anything. Obviously people are going to be able to understand that you were part of that process. And the clinical trials at the end of the day are that. It's just the big leagues, essentially. So I'll save my internship experience for I think another question down here, but yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, I'd really like to echo what Joe said. I think it's important to do research in a way that it's important to have a project that you're passionate about. And it shows that you have these skills that can be transferable. Like Joe said, the scientific method, following through, maybe having a publication at the end of it, even if it's not a clinical publication, it still teaches you a lot of the skills that you will be using. And when you are interviewing and you're able to discuss your project with passion, that does come across. And we do see it on the other side of the table interviewing. And we do want someone who is actually passionate about science and wants to keep learning and wants to, and that's the reason why they did the research, not really just to check off a box of, hey, I did a research, take me as a fellow now. It's more of how you talk about it and what you got out of that project, what you learned.
I had no research experience going in. I had internship experience, but I'll save that for a different question. And I just echo what Joe and Anastasia said about being passionate, because honestly, that's what's going to translate. You have to actually believe in what you're saying and not be doing it for the check mark.
Yeah, I mean, my lab didn't even, like, they weeded people out hard because of that, right? I mean, it's just not, you're going into science because you like science. You're not going into science because resume. Also, to speak to something Anastasia said, it is important, I think, if you're right there and you can get the publication, I think that looks really great. And, I think it's the crowning achievement. But coming from a guy who really, really wanted a publication on his resume from all the stuff that I did a lot of research. I did around 4 years of total research in school. I didn't actually have my name on a paper. I just wasn't at the right place at the right time with the labs that I worked in, and don't think that that's a problem. That still shows that you're invested, even if you haven't gotten a publication.
Yeah, so like the general consensus is that you guys, like, it's all about how you take it in stride, I guess. Like if you're looking at, if you did a research, how you're projecting that, how you're telling people that you participated in it, and how you really actively did it, but it's not the end all be all if you didn't get one. Okay. Another question we had in the chat was, how would undergoing a fellowship be better than doing a residency in terms of getting more experience and better opportunities to find a job in industry?
I think that's a question for Sean.
Yeah, I guess that's geared towards me. So, and that's a great question indeed, because I know at least for BMS, we actually do have it's technically a residency, but still with the company where the resident would do 1 year residency down at a hospital and then do their second year as, I guess, a quote unquote fellowship in the industry. It's not specifically with clinical development, but again, I do want to echo that there are opportunities where if you're still stuck in between of doing a residency and fellowship, if you want to do both, those opportunities are out there. Also, as well, I've seen a lot of residents and people that work in hospitals go into the industry sector. But I think back to the question, it's tough. I really do think that with, at least in clinical development, I can't speak to, I guess, other functional areas, but I really do think in clinical development that you do need at least that 1 to 2 years of that fellowship to really make that stride in clinical development. I think regardless of the title that you have at the end of your name, it really comes down to experience at the end of the day, and getting that experience for those 2 years really helps you get that job into the industry sector versus doing a residency, let's say, and then doing a year in clinical development. And so I don't know if that technically answers the question, but that's the kind of the way that I view it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was very helpful information, and definitely gave us a little bit of insight on fellowship and ideally just experience in general makes it better for you to be in that position to work in the clinical development area.
Mm-hmm.
Another question we got was it easy getting an internship in industry, and do the steps differ from applying to internship in a hospital or community pharmacy?
So I'll take that one. So first off, I think the main difference is when you get an internship in a hospital or community, it's something you do year round. And that's usually something that you do in your free time, kind of after studying or after class, and it's spread out. With industry internships, they're mainly focused as summer internships. So you would have to apply for them. And that kind of has some weight to it, because if you have IPhOs, but I think you guys said that IPhOs are now throughout the year, not in the summers, but so that's, never mind, that's off the table. But back in the day, it was harder to maneuver because people would have mandatory IPhOs for 3 weeks in the summer, and that would take out that opportunity for internships. So that's one of the things. So it's basically giving up your summer for a full-time 40 hours a week job. If you're willing to do that, that's definitely an opportunity to take. That being said, applications start December or January, and you have to be really on top of it if you want that internship for the summer. It's a process that starts early. You'll need letters of recommendation. It's almost like applying for a fellowship, but in a smaller scale. But again, you want to cast that wide net, like Sean mentioned earlier, for fellowships, and you want to make sure you're applying everywhere that you think you can. And with that comes also geography. So it really depends on where you are. Being in Philly, though, you guys are kind of lucky because New Jersey has a lot of opportunities. New York has a lot of opportunities. Even Philly has a lot of opportunities. So you're in that hub that you can have those summer opportunities if you're willing to stay in the area for the summer. I don't know where you're from originally, but the New Jersey, Philadelphia area is really good for those opportunities.
I also had an internship. I had an internship for 3 summers, same internship each summer at GSK as a statistician for their measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella vaccines, quickly sharing. But I applied in the summertime to 60 to 70 internships every single summer. So when you hear cast a wide net, that means like trawler level, like trying to catch all the tuna in the ocean kind of net. So, you know, and it's not hard once you get your CV and whatever else you need into that system at GSK or wherever, right? I mean, you know, you can slot it in there. So, you know, you really need to, really be tenacious about it and get your foot in the door if you really want the industry internship. But I think it really can help you in many, many ways, as mine did, to get in front of the right people and to get, you know, noticed for sure. Not to say that it has to happen. You can still get noticed, obviously, without it. It's just something you can obviously speak to and use. So.
I had an internship at Takeda, and one thing I'll say is that I think a lot of internships in the industry, they will pay you, they might relocate you, they might provide you housing, they might give you a housing stipend. For example, Genentech interns, they have a great program, they get a housing stipend, which in the Bay Area is crazy good. And the benefits are really good. So if that motivates you to cast a wider net, don't just apply to the internships that are, you know, within driving distance of your home. Don't limit yourself like that. If you can move somewhere for the summer and know that you'll be taken care of, just apply, see what happens. The other thing is, if you do get an interview, make sure you read the job description and learn more about what that department does, because I think a lot of interns apply and they, for example, they don't know what department really they're applying for because they just put out 60 applications, like Joe said.
Hey, but I read those before I got the internet.
I know you did. I know you did. So
I know you're joking. Don't worry.
Yeah, be like Joe. If you have an interview, they're going to spend some time talking to you. So why don't you do some research ahead of time? You're way more likely to get the position if you're able to at least know some of the basic stuff that they do. All of these departments are going to sound so foreign to you. Just try one. Just see if you like it.
Thank you guys for that information. And thanks for Irina for spilling the beans on that position. We have one more question that just came in the chat, and it says, I want to apply for clinical development fellowships and it's time for me to choose rotations. Would fellowship recruiters not appreciate other functional area rotations?
So I think any industry experience is valued, but also if you have a rotation in a different function, nobody's stopping you from scheduling like a one-on-one with somebody in clinical development and learning more about them. Also, I think we all mentioned this at this point, but just in case, we all work cross-functionally, so you're going to meet people in clinical development regardless of which functional area you're in, and you can always just raise your hand and ask, like take that initiative and ask for a clinical development project like to add onto your plate. As long as you don't drop the ball in your primary responsibilities, nobody's usually going to say no, especially to a student, because they want you to succeed and they want their rotation to be valuable for you. So say you're doing a medical affairs rotation and you're working with somebody from clinical development on something else, and you can always ask, hey, I want a clinical development fellowship. Can you give me additional work where I can showcase those abilities so that I have something to talk about during interviews? So if you take on that additional responsibility and you have those things to talk about, you'll be okay, regardless of which functional area you're in.
Yeah, and maybe be prepared for the question. They'll ask you, hey, I saw you rotated in medical affairs. Why did you choose clinical science? Why are you not applying for medical affairs fellowships? Just have an answer prepared. And it's totally fine to say, I did medical affairs. I did not like it, but I worked with a clinical scientist, and that's why I'm interested in this fellowship. It's totally fine to say that you did not enjoy working, or you didn't fully like all of the responsibilities of that functional area, and that's why you think clinical development is a good fit for you. That's good. It shows reflection. It shows that you've thought about it and thought about where you want to end up ultimately.
So thank you for that information. I guess to go along with the internships and fellowships as well, how can students stand out among other candidates while applying for them?
I will take this, but I think I have a non-traditional answer to this. It's gonna kind of harp on what Joe said earlier about it's all about the fit, but it really does come down a lot to the fit, because you can do a lot of things right in your pharmacy student career and think that you're ticking off all the boxes. If you're applying for a role that's wrong for you, or for a company that's wrong for you, you might not know it, but people on the other side will. And I think that my story works as a pretty good example for that. Not to toot my own horn, but I had industry experience with internships. I started the IPhO chapter. I was student government president. I had an FDA rotation. I didn't get a fellowship at mid-year because I was applying to things that were wrong for me, and I didn't know that at the time. I learned that in the process, and I learned it later, and I did my own reflection on it and got a fellowship post mid-year. But honestly, I didn't get it because of the fit. It wasn't a place for me where I would have been successful. It wasn't a place where I would have actually ended up liking to work. So my advice usually in this category is be yourself. And even though there's a saying of fake it till you make it, I don't think it really applies to a fellowship process, because if you're faking it during interviews, you're going to have to fake it for the rest of your fellowship if you get that position. You're going to be miserable in that role. So be true to yourself and look for that genuine relationship with your interviewers. Look for that genuine connection. And where do you see yourself smiling the most? Like, these are people you're going to have to work with. They're not just going to go away. So if you don't like them in an interview setting, you're most likely not going to like them down the line. So be genuine and honest with yourself, and not kind of just trying to squish yourself into a role just to get a role.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, if the shoe doesn't fit, you can't wear it. Switching gears a bit as well, the standout part is something that I really worked hard at, and so I think that it goes back to what I said earlier too about people want to see that you're a whole person. When I was looking at how to go about after my degree, what I was going to do, I said to myself, do people want that guy who did the 4.00000 and then he slept, and then woke up and then he studied and he was like a robot mechanically going around getting good grades? And while good grades are, kind of the entry price, don't be ashamed if your GPA isn't, perfect, right? But instead, you had some other things going on, right? Like during interviews, I got asked about the satirical newspaper I wrote for. I got asked about all kinds of interesting stuff. And so I think that, it is worth investing some time in some interesting stuff, right? Do you like horses and you ride horses? Equestrian club, that kind of thing. Because at the end of the day, you're going to be at receptions and people are going to be, you're going to be eating, hors d'oeuvres and stuff, and or you're just going to be talking to them in general, and they're going to want to know more than just the scientist Joe. They're going to want to know about the interesting other things you do, and it's just a very important thing. I think at the end of the day, I solved my question right with the other type of person, which is, not the robotic mechanical gets grades and, goes to bed, but, the person who actually has a lot to them and has a really deep story. And so I think, people who build deep stories and understand themselves well and go after that kind of that kind of well-roundedness that I think Irina, even you said you were a jack of all trades but master of none in college. You know, that's the kind of thing that I think people want to hear too. So.
Thank you
Yeah.
guys. Oh, sorry.
I just one last point. I was never asked my GPA throughout any of the fellowship interviews or even after I was accepted. So, you know, I'm not saying throw it out the window, but you know, if you're feeling inadequate, or if you know you're feeling bad that you don't have a 4.0, please don't apply. Showcase your other skills, like Joseph was saying. We like to see a whole person instead of just someone who only goes to school, goes to sleep, goes to school, does an internship. That doesn't come across as genuine, and it sometimes it does come across as robotic. So and then you're left wondering with, well, who is that person really? If I was to sit next to them every day at work and have to rely on them, who are they really? I know they can get a 4.0, but what about other staff? So yeah, don't worry about your GPA.
Good to know that I don't need a perfect GPA for this. And I know you guys mentioned a lot about your fellowships and previous internships, so you answered a lot of our questions that we were planning on asking you guys. Does any other student have like questions that they want to be asked, or you can unmute yourself and ask if you'd like, or you can just type it in the chat.
I guess when everyone's thinking about questions too, I don't know the age or I guess grade level we're at here too. I know we didn't talk much about mid-year this year with it being virtual, so we're also happy to speak about that as well.
Yeah, definitely. If you had any other words of wisdom or wanted to speak about anything that happened to you throughout your experience, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I guess as we're thinking of questions, I can answer that, Victoria. Great question. And so I think there's two different parts of what happened when I was in mid-year versus what's going on now. But I think, again, going back to that point of what made you stand out is really what I tell students now, like you're doing the hard part now of getting those experiences, learning your failures, learning who you are, and then just talking about those. That's the easy part at mid-year. So really just owning up and knowing what you truly have done. And so with mid-year this year, I would say, again, even though it's going to be this virtual setting, there are, again, also conversations of having virtual receptions and things of that nature. But I think most likely every company is going to have it virtual. I don't think you'll be able to go in the office and see anybody in person. But even though it is virtual, I still think you're going to have that personal feel to it. So the biggest thing is those nonverbal cues. So your eye contact, the way you're using your hands. Are you crossing your hands, crossing your feet? Are you moving your hands all over the place? How is your head movement? How is your eye movement? When you speak, how are you sharing your stories? And as well as just really knowing, interviewing those candidates as well, or interviewing the interviewers. And I think that's the biggest thing that a lot of candidates forget to do, is that you're also interviewing the company, and they're not just interviewing you. But I think particularly what I've been giving advice, and I'd love to hear the rest of the panel what their thoughts are to see if this is the right advice to give. But what I've been telling candidates is, one, make sure that you ask for contact information at the end. Usually when we're in mid-year physically, would give you a business card, and that would be like the start before the interview even happened. And this year, because it's virtual, we might forget as interviewers. So I think as an interviewee, you should be proactive in that regard. And then the second thing is to really ask that question up front of what is the next step in the interview process. So not saying, hey, are you gonna give me a second round interview, but just saying, hey, what's the next step in the interview process? So you're not left in the dark of what's gonna happen. Again, some companies are doing second round interviews on a rolling basis that they'll let you know at the end of the day. Or that's how we used to do it at mid-year. And then personally, my company, what we're doing is we're gonna look at all the first round interviews and let candidates know 2 weeks after their interview. So just knowing where you stand, I think helps you out. And then again, try to get those preconceived notions of, oh, well, I didn't do so well, and you all worried, versus, well, I actually won't hear back for a few more weeks, so I shouldn't be freaking out yet. So that's my advice.
No, I agree with Sean. And we actually have my fellowship had always been doing virtual interviews from the start. So I think we have a leg up a little bit because we're used to this setting. So what I would say, definitely try to schedule video calls with your friends beforehand so that you can adjust your camera, kind of know what fits into your frame, make sure that it looks professional, make sure that you look professional, still dress up. I've had candidates on a video interview in a t-shirt and shorts. I've also had make sure that you're not disrupted when you're there, so phones aren't ringing or nobody's coming into the room and distracting you. Make sure you tell everybody in your house, hey, I'm interviewing for this half an hour. So like I actually onboarded onto my full-time role during COVID, so I did all of my interviews in my parents' basement because anyway, every single time I had to go upstairs and be like, hey, I have an interview, half an hour, quiet. And I had 2 cats in the house, so that was hard to close the door and not have them come in. But you kind of have to work around it. You have to be proactive with what you do and basically ensure that your professionalism shines through even through a camera. Eye contact was something that was really hard for me because you have to look at the camera, not at the person's face that's on the screen. So in order for them to see your eyes going straight. So that's something that I had to practice with a friend. And I definitely recommend that because your eyes stray. And while it's easy to do eye contact in person because you're looking straight at the person, if you're looking straight at the person when you're on camera, you're not looking at them. And that's kind of something that's hard to wrap your mind around. Other than that, just again, be yourself.
So thank you guys for all of your great insight on all of the questions. I think because I don't have any other questions that popped up in the chat, so it looks like that's going to be a wrap on the questions. So Jasmine, did you want to finish off?
Yeah, so for all the people who are still here, I have kind of linked every pharmacist's LinkedIn using the QR codes. You guys can go ahead and use your phones to scan them and follow them on LinkedIn and ask them as many questions as you want. I will say, like, I'm in my 5th year and I've been to a lot of speaker events, but you 4 have been like the best speakers I've ever listened to. You guys have been so enthusiastic, so informative. Like, I'm just like so happy this happened, and like I was able to host you for literally for all like my P1s and P2s. Please utilize these pharmacists for all your questions. Like, probably one of the top people I've ever seen that are like being so helpful and like really helping us in our pharmacy journey. So make sure you guys have that. I will also be sending this out later on too. If anyone misses it or doesn't get the chance to, you can also just email me and I can send you guys the links as well. So we'll be wrapping up.
Jasmine, I wanted to thank you as well. I think this is great, a great idea. And I think that, exposing everyone to this is so important. I don't know if I got that exposure when I was in school. I just sort of did it myself. So I think it's a great idea. So good job.
Thank you.
I want to hop on that. Thank you so much. And I also want to thank everybody who came because I saw that we had 32 people at the beginning and we have 29 people now. So the fact that majority of you stayed is huge. So thank you.